My background, my name is Temesghen Asmeron. Have been here in the States 20 years now. Lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico for around 5 years, then moved to Dallas to work at UT Southwestern, then City of Dallas, then graduate school, then ended up in Dallas ISD as a teacher in Lakewood area. After that, I was asked to lead a department, from a department to be an assistant principal, from assistant principal. Then I have been principal of a high school with Dallas ISD at M.A.J. Conrad High School for the last 4 years. Married with 2 kids. I am truly blessed to raise a son and a daughter. Originally from East Africa, a small country called Eritrea. Used to be part of Ethiopia, right at that volatile area of eastern side of Africa. I was asked to speak on refugee situation, or the whole concept of refugee, and I think that's fitting to address it based on the topic and also how that looks like from my perspective, both my personal journey and also as a principal or educator. What does that refugee concept place in the role? I have 3 buckets today to share with you. One is the very definition of the word refugee. The second bucket is once we define the word, what is the present, the past, and the future of a given typical refugee? And the third part is what do we see the benefit of having refugees, quote unquote, here in this beautiful country of ours. Overall, when we have conversation around refugee, the one unfortunate aspect of it is that quite the word is defined by many interest groups, from our wonderful politicians to churches, civic organization groups, and you name it, many people define that word to fit their narrative. And it's only quite handful organizations from my perspective that truly understand the journey of a refugee and can speak with authority about what a refugee means. At least from what I see, there are 3 groups that we see when they define a refugee. From my conversation with different people, both as educator and as an individual, or through my church and the different church groups that I get involved with, some people have their perspective of being a refugee is someone who had this life somewhere. If it is mostly in Africa, it's just in spite of over 50 different countries, over 1,000 different ethnic groups. We put everybody from Africa in one bucket and we just give them the narration that this person is from Africa. When there is quite contrary and also extremely heterogeneous combination of both cultural, religious, and social differences among people of African origin. Or if someone is coming from the southern border, or he looks or seems Hispanic, we tend to bulk them, whether in our conversation or in our expectation or in the way we try to accommodate them, as if everyone is coming from Mexico or just around that area. Then if they have a light skin from Middle Eastern or somewhere from Asia, we have a different category too. But overall, the first group is that many people have perception that this refugee had a decent life and they just needed a better life, so they chose to come to the United States. And how they get here, many of the people that I encountered I could be in a position where I have a very narrow demography that I'm talking, and I want to profess that my perspective might be very narrow, so I want you to listen from that angle. Or it could be the majority of the people have this perception. I don't know. But from my perspective, the first group are people who think about the word refugee is there are these people who live in a different country, had a decent life. Decent, of course, is relative, and they just decided to have a better life, and they came to the United States. So there is point A and there is point B. How they get from point A to point B, we're not conscious about it. They just were there and they're here. Then what do we do about it? The second group of people, when they think about refugee, is they put them in this, there are these people who had these horrible experiences and they were deprived of life and they had nothing to lose, and because they did not have anything to live for and they just gave up that and they just came to a better life, so we have to support them. These are the second. The third type of group that I have encountered both professionally and personally are people who truly understand what refugee means, or the journey of a typical refugee person. So since it's the third one, that's the right mindset, or the people with the right mindset. We'll get into it and I will elaborate that. But the first two, let me share with you all, if you allow me, why that is concern for me and it's not a right perspective and we really need to rethink about it. One, for the first group who think that there are these people called refugee and they had a decent life and they're just coming to the United States because they wanted a better life. That is a very, very, very small percentile of the overall population when we think about the idea of refugee. Those people who actually leave their home country looking for the betterment of themselves and their family to come to the United States or to other countries. In this context, I think the United States, they're very few, and they're the most privileged in their original country. By virtue of them living for a better opportunity, actually they put their country and their population at a harm's way. Because from my perspective, for example, I left my hometown after 1998, the war broke out between Ethiopia and Eritrea. My oldest brother died. So it was a very dark situation for myself and my family. I was a third-year college student and I had to leave my home country. Of course, my journey to the United States is not the typical journey because I flew out of my country with Lufthansa Airlines to come to the United States because I had paperwork to go to college here in University of New Mexico. But when I left my country, when you see the percentile of college educated back home, at that time we had only one university, and the capacity of the university was only 400 students out of the whole country. So if the university has a capacity to educate only 400 students per year, and out of those 400 students, if 50% of them are leaving the country, we're leaving the whole nation at a 50% disadvantage, and the trickle effect of it on the overall population is actually detrimental. So this net migration of educated people, quote unquote, if that educated is appropriate to my case, and I don't think it is, but in the context of those original countries, we're leaving these countries at a very perilous situation where we're leaving them with the overall not so educated, but at the same time, for the most part, the government invests in us and in people like myself, but we're taking whatever foundation we had to come to the United States to build upon itself and be productive citizen right here. then the people and the government that invested in us, because of the instability, are deprived to reap off or to get the benefit of their early investment in our life. So, but that's a very small group of people. And usually people like myself or people who left a decent life and decided to improve their life and their family's life that wanted to migrate to first world country. By the way, this first world is just disturbing word because we have first world and we have third world. We don't have second world. But at least to the Western world, the United States, the developed world, we don't get into the windwheel of being refugee because we come with a level of education and professionalism. We quickly get adjusted and we are already in the midst of professional community and we do well. So even though we were starting the journey as refugee, but quickly we are assimilated and get accepted to the overall demography or status of being educated or in a professional community, and we don't get lumped into the conversation of refugee. So that's a very small group. The second part is where they get significant mistreatment or misunderstanding. As a result, good people of good intentions have a different perspective of this so-called second group refugee. And these are people who somehow we're told, not necessarily you, the audience right here, but this organization, I'm pretty sure if you were not really open-minded, welcoming, and trying to understand and to do right for refugees and for the organization that it belongs, you would not have been here. But the overall Western population, because of media, because of some not so connected incidents, we have this perception, or people have perception about refugees as if they had this miserable a life not to live, so they had nothing to lose and they just left that life and they just came to the United States. Or they're attempting to come to the United States. That is by far wrong. And there are many reasons why those understandings or those concepts are wrong. One, people value their life for different reasons and from a different viewpoints that have been shaped by their past experiences. And our past experiences are a collective outcome of our generational inheritance for one way or the other. And quite often, these values get built in us, not because of choices, it's because of our way of life. And this is what we have to appreciate. People's feeling toward this today is quite often shaped by yesterday's experience. And yesterday's experience is a result of not only my individual perspective or my individual contribution to yesterday's reality, but also the contribution of other people and circumstances that played a role in me and around me. So when people leave their hometown, or when people are asked or choose to go outside their country, it's not because they had nothing to lose. Actually, they had everything to lose except their life or the life of their child or the lives of their family. Now the choice is as if someone is gonna yank your arm out of your body so that you can walk alive. And if that was to happen to someone, person who is bleeding, walking with one arm, still experiencing the trauma of losing an arm, someone should never approach that person as if this person doesn't have a loss or is not in pain. So to give you a little bit of just to how I grew up. So I grew up in a very modest home, but I don't think living in the here in the United States, my own kids don't understand the level of poverty I grew with, because every time I talk to them, their mind cannot comprehend that level of poverty. So it's a small house in a sense, one room actually, where I used to share with my mom, dad, my bed, our cooking was in the same room. The same room is our living room, and the same room is our storage. Uh, but I value that because I had my mom, my dad, that made me to believe that I can do whatever I want to in the right way. Uh, every time around 5:30, dad comes home, mom is always at home. So we eat, we have a local drink, and we chit chat and just wrestle through the evening. And my dad usually goes to bed around 8:30 or 9. And I enjoyed that life. We didn't have a car. I didn't have a bicycle. We didn't have a refrigerator. I didn't have TV. I didn't have iron electric. Actually, electricity was scarce back then. But the life and the value that drove our daily life meant something to us or to me. So material-wise, I am in a much, much, much better right now. But when it comes to the quality of life, life is much deeper than that. And when I left home, I'm the youngest of my family. My brothers have been in the States. Uh, my oldest brother has been in the United States since 1970s. I was not born. Actually, we met with my oldest brother 1991 when I was only 16 years old. So I just met him for the first time. So every time he comes to visit home, even though he was telling me the glory of the United States, I always wanted to stay at home. If it was not for the war and loss of my brother, I think I would have stayed back home. I'm telling you this because not because I'm not happy here. I think we have the greatest country in the world. And I think the people of this United States are the most civilized population in the whole world, in spite of every ugly thing we hear. And this is home for me now. But I made it home after I opened my eyes to see the value that is within the people and the opportunity that I have as a citizen for myself and for my generation. So the second reason why it's damaging is people, they leave their country not because they had nothing to lose. Actually, they had a lot to lose except their life. They're living it with quite a lot of pain and suffering. Some of them with choices like myself. Some of them, they had no choice, but only a choice between dying and trying to take a chance in life. So we really need to understand that it's not because they had nothing to lose, they're leaving their country. Actually, they had a lot to lose when they left their country, or they're still living their country, except the sheer desire to be alive. This has been in many instances documented in many psychological books. There was actually, he died a few years back, a famous Jewish psychologist, and he wrote a book, a very small book, and he discusses about his experience when he was in the German concentration camps. And to his surprise, all these Jew prisoners, knowing that there is a furnace next door to where they're sleeping, that's one day when they get sick or if they get old, they're going to be sent. And they know people that grew up with them, were there with them, have been killed. But yet again, they always had a life within the concentration camp, hoping that there will be a day that they're going to get out of this concentration camp and they will live a life. And that's just the human psychology. So all these refugees, when they leave their country, even though many of them have horrendous journey, but they walk this with hope of a better life. But it's not because they don't feel they have lost a lot. Actually, they leave behind a lot. And I'm sharing this with you all to say that when we discuss about refugees, I really want us to approach that journey with an appreciation of someone who has left so many of his or her values, things that define this person behind them, to find who they are in a new environment. From personal experience, I'm just going to be very vulnerable with you. It's a difficult journey because there is nothing more disturbing than losing yourself in a journey of life, knowing that there was part of you that has been disconnected from the origin. Now you're trying to redefine, and every time people will confuse you. As probably you will find it absolutely foolish, but some of the experiences I'll share with you. So people will approach me and they will say, hey, where are you from? And I'll tell them I'm from Eritrea or Ethiopia. It doesn't make a difference for me. And they'll say, oh, what is that? And I will say, oh, it's in East Africa. What in East Africa? Then you go through this whole 5 minutes conversation defining first where East Africa is, what country defines East Africa. Then you show them exactly where you're at, what culture you had. And they'll say, oh, I get it. Then the next question will be, so how long have you been here since you came from Africa? I just spent 5 minutes explaining exactly where I'm from, the difference that defines who I am from another refugee from Africa. Now you're gonna ignore every conversation I have had with you for 5 minutes, and you're gonna ask me that, how long has I been since I came from Africa? I know. It's sometimes, okay, you just have to shrug it off. But as much as you can shrug it off, it gives you a sense of losing your identity. Because the difference between, for example, how I grew up, the food I eat, the language I speak, the cultural tenets I have, between myself, don't even go too far, just a few hundred miles to Djibouti, a small country next door, their food, their language, their culture, completely different. The tribe that I grew versus 40 miles away from the village or the city I grew, they have a different upbringing, different tenets, cultural norms that define them. I don't even look like them. But when everybody is put together, and just for simplicity of the conversation, someone asks you, okay, so how long have you been since you came from Africa? It's just like, oh, we just spent 5 minutes having conversation around exactly where I'm from. It's like somebody telling me that he's from Peru and he's prideful about the geography of Peru. And I'm just gonna say, so how long have you been here since you came from Latin America? That just destroys that person's identity. And those are the things, the second part of mistakes that we do when we discuss about refugee. But the third one is the healthy approach, and that's what I need to define it and talk about the past, the present, and the future in a life of a refugee. Then we will open for Q&A if any of you have a question. The third one is people and systems that understand the three major defining characteristics from my perspective of what a refugee is. And those are, one, organizations or individuals that recognize the individual identity of a given refugee. The second part of that refugee journey is people who will understand from point A to point B. What I mean by that is from where they left their hometown to where they're at right now, there are 100 stops in between, not numerically, just many stops and experiences that define this refugee. The third point is the refugee that is right here, right now, is still an individual person that is trying to define who he is in the midst of all this confusion. I am not my people. I am me that defines part of my community. If we want to flip that definition, it's going to come as you are your community defines you, and that kind of definition gets us to the wrong conclusion. So the true concept of being a refugee is, let me repeat the 3 points. One is that knowing that that person is their individual and they had origin. Second, their journey had many destinations that defined or contributed to that person's experience. The third one is that individual today is an individual that's contributing to the definition of a community, not the other way. For example, in my current campus, we have students from over close to 30 different countries. We have students from Middle East, we have students from many different parts of Africa, we have students pretty much from every Latin America. We have students, last year we had 2 students from Europe. So it's a very diverse campus. But let me give you a story of 2 different groups. So we have students that are, they say they're Eritreans, like myself. So I was born in Eritrea, in the capital city. I was raised in Eritrea. I went to school, elementary, high school, college back home in Eritrea. I left Eritrea to come to the United States. So my journey has been from point A to point B without no experience in between, except trying to figure out who I am here. But I have students right now in my campus that say they're from Eritrea, but they have never been to Eritrea. Actually, their parents left Eritrea in the 70s when we had civil war. They went to refugee camp in Sudan. They were born in Sudan, but their parents made sure that these kids did not grow as Sudanese, but as Eritreans. And from Sudan, because things did not improve back home, they came to the United States. I have another group that is Burmese, and they will tell you they're Burmese, but they have never been to Burma. As a matter of fact, their parents met at a refugee camp, either in Thailand or somewhere in Asia. They got married. Then they had to leave that refugee camp to be to another refugee camp. Then they started family at that refugee camp. They were born at that refugee camp, but their parents told them they're from Burma. And these kids claim that they're from Burma, and they have been on this long journey from Asia all the way to the United States with the hope of belonging to this country called Burma that they have never seen, and they probably will never see in their life. I hope not, but things are not improving either in my country or in Burma. So these are the people that we deal every day, the so-called refugee. We have people from Middle Eastern that they come to the United States. I have a Lebanese student, I have Iraqi student, I have student from Afghanistan, I have students from all the Middle East parts of our world. When they come, our demographic paperwork gives them the option to choose between white, Black or African American, Hispanic, non-Hispanic descent. The system categorizes them as white. So these kids grew up being told they're Arabs. They're not that light skinned to feel that they're white, but the options they're giving them defines them in one way or the other. And they come to define who they are, to find who they are, to go to school, but the system is telling them, no, you have only these options to choose who you are. And we might think it's a very simple category, what's a big deal? But they're defining who they are one step at a time to live in this dichotomy of interests in their life. So as they go through this journey, though, people experience a lot of good and a lot of bad things that defines them today. And why is this important for us to understand their individual identity, the steps they took on their journey, and also still choose to define them individually? And I'll give you a few scenarios. Ed, he is the president of Pixar, wrote a book called Connectivity. And he discusses about the importance of appreciating our past experiences and how that experience filters today's information so that we can interpret it with the right understanding. So these Eritrean students that were born in Sudan, their parents have told them this utopia perspective of their home country. And most refugees, that's where, because of our values, we tend to, I hate to say this, a little exaggerate our experiences from back home. It's not usually honest. I don't think we are intentionally lying, but because our judgment is clouded by the values, we appreciate how we grew up, we tend to tell to our kids as if we left behind Ethiopia. It's not true. There was quite a lot of situations that made us to leave our home country, but we don't openly address those wounds for many reasons. And I'll address it. Why is that prevalent in our community? So these kids grew up in Sudan in refugee camp. Their parents told them there is this country called Eritrea with all these amazing things. Then they had the hope of going back. But at one point, they will tell them, no, we're going to go to a third country. Now, while they were in Sudan, they have had experienced a different treatment of what a foreigner looks like. Not every country in the world is as welcoming, as gracious as we are here in the United States. I have had experiences, and I have had many, and I still have many friends and relatives that live from Europe all the way to Afghanistan. I have one right now who's living with the Kurds in Iraq. Brutal things happen in these quote unquote third countries that accept refugees from Lebanon to anywhere in the world. So they had this bad experience, then they had to leave and they had to come to the United States. So when their first experience in a foreign country has been with suspicion and second-class treatment, now they come to the United States, that experience has given them a filter that they are going to use on how they're going to interpret today's effort from all of us. Northwest Community Center, through the Northwest Bible Church, they do tremendous work to empower refugees, and I have absolute respect for that church and for the effort that they're doing and their members. But many of my students that goes to the center, when I ask them, still there with the deep appreciation, they go to the center, but always on the back of their head, they have this fear, this unconscious bias to how they accept the amazing work this community center is doing in the middle of their neighborhood. Now, we should not judge. We should not get to any other unnecessary conclusions except to appreciate their hurt, their wound, and how their past experiences has enslaved them from accepting what is a blessing in today's reality here in the United States. Then they go, not only they were treated as a second class, but there was no feeling of belongingness to this country, whether in today or in tomorrow's reality, because you are always living in the hope of going back to your parents' home country. But the third and ugly part of that conversation or that reality is you would never, as a refugee, be able to appreciate the blessing of your current circumstances because you always will compare today's reality with what your parents have told you you could have enjoyed life in this quote unquote Ethiopia land of your ancestors. It's not reality, it's a phantom belief of adults because of their whatever value they prioritize in their life to see their past so that they can pass it to their kids except there is a little bit disconnectivity with reality. These are the refugees that have been shaped in their journey that will come to the United States. When they come to the United States, like myself, and I have many experiences I can share with you as a Christian, the televangelist, how much they distorted my perspective, and I can speak to it. I can tell you how the media can set a fear among refugees about how the society perceives them, because I can watch a TV today and it can mask every good deeds of every mission work, every community organizer, every decency of every citizen in this country. Because when I am in my home and I'm watching a news, as we all know and have experienced it, when we are with the people of like-minded, we have a little bit of freedom to exercise and to have conversation our implicit bias about reality. When you are a refugee in a home with a refugee community, you hear a news, you're going to translate the news in a way that fits your current fears, and the people around you are going to feed that fear, then you create your own reality. Then every time you go outside and you meet good people like yourself who are here, this refugee will come with a sense of fear, second thought, and doubt to the help or the opportunity that presents within themselves. If we appreciate them, now when we interact with these refugees, or like myself, when we interact with individuals, we really have to recognize them as individuals. What does that look like? What it looks like is, for example, for me, for what does that look like? Let me be a little bit vulnerable with you all. I would want someone to come to me and say, hey, where are you from? And we will have conversation. I greatly appreciate that. I know someone from your country, so and so, and he's a good guy, and I love your people. I don't exist in that conversation. I know, so don't get me wrong. I always, because of the books I read, I have a different mindset to appreciate the person's effort, which the person is trying to relate with me. And the fact that he or she is going out of her way to tell me a story that I can connect is a respectable position. But not every refugee will have that feeling or understanding to accept the gesture of the person who is conversing with that individual. I am from Burma or Ethiopia. I have been to Ethiopian restaurant. I really don't care, because to be honest with you, I personally rarely go to Ethiopian restaurant. Actually, my favorite restaurant is La Madeleine. I go to La Madeleine. I was there this morning. I would rather you talk to me about La Madeleine rather than Ethiopian restaurant food. But that's me individual. So it's good to recognize individuals as who they are and have conversation around what's their aspiration. Then see me how my personal experience will shape my community rather than define me from my community perspective. Because remember, and this is me, there are a lot of things that happen within my culture that created the reality we have back home, which has caused for me to leave my home country. So when you try to, out of good heart, try to talk to me in a bulk of my community, I'm still losing who I am, and that doesn't empower me moving forward. It's like me talking to some white male American, and I, oh, where are you from? From Ohio. Oh, when I was back home, I saw a white male who came to talk to us, and I really like him. I'm pretty, and he's from Ohio. I'm pretty sure the person from Ohio will say, so? Because I really need us to, but if someone from Ohio is saying, hey, I'm from Ohio, my question should be, wow, I have never been to Ohio. What drove you down here to Dallas? then we can have really conversation. And if he says, oh, I'm starting this business, my next question could be, wow, do you think this business can work back in Ohio? Or how is life in Ohio? Could be better, rather than me saying, I was in LA last week. You're not going to believe. I met someone from Ohio. He was so excited about Ohio, and the person is going to look like he lost their mind, right? So I really need us to think about recognizing individuals, not in a context of their culture. And that will help them to be better citizens. That's why, for example, French as a country has a huge problem of refugees. A year and a half ago, we had a European delegate that came to visit my campus. We had conversation around, they're barely starting. I am so proud of our country. I'm so proud of this country. I'm proud of being an American. We are leading the way. It's not what Fox says, it's not what CNN says. I really don't care. My reality, my experience is different. And I can talk about data after data because that's what I do for a living. We live in a very, very, very blessed country. We're ahead. So French, they have people from Morocco, 3-generation Moroccans that have been living in this community. The government recognized them as a Moroccan. There is a fund that is given to code and decode their community engagement, but subconsciously, instead of appreciating their individual being, it keeps them in this understanding of community engagement funding that they do their cultural events while they're in France. They live as Moroccans. That's why we have had this tremendous level of lack of employment, tremendous level of terrorism, and things flourish within that community because they recognizes them as a bulk. They stayed in that community. It just keeps them there. And I don't think, from my perspective, that's a good approach. We have to look into individually recognize their role so that they can move forward. Okay. I will finish in the next 5 minutes. Sorry, my talking might have taken a whole lot of time than I have planned. So the past of a refugee has value that defines that person. The past of a refugee is a place that was home. A past of a refugee is something that has shaped the person's identity to what he or she is today. The present is full of challenges. It's full of challenges linguistically, it's full of challenges cognitively, and full of challenges emotionally and socially, and we have to identify. And a teaching, for example, in our campus, many people, because they have linguistic challenge, they connected it to cognitive challenge, which means because they don't speak English fluently, they assume they're not educated. By far, actually, they might be ahead of their peers. When we see the data, actually, most refugees outdo their peers academically. So we really need to distinguish, because they have linguistic challenges, it doesn't translate to cognitive challenges. But at the same time, we really have to appreciate the social emotional challenges that every refugee that goes through. I myself, I just read a book by Dr. Brackett, Permission to Feel. It just really opens your eye about how limited we were to deal with our feelings, with our emotions, because we grew up in a culture that never offered us the chance to express your feelings or to discuss about your emotional hurt and things like that. So there are these things we really need to figure that out. But the last one is the future. So the past, there are so many things that define the present or has shaped. The present is full of many challenges, and there are things that we need to be proud of. But the future, there is individual and collective aspiration to be part of this nation and this country and part of the churches or the community that you all belong. People want to be part of it. Believe me, I live in a refugee. I have a church that is serving Ethiopian and Eritrean community. I belong with so many organizations that work with civic programs here in the community. I get involved with different churches in our neighborhood. Refugees want to be part of this country and this community. There is aspiration. We just have to build the bridge. The second one is there is a lack of support and means to connect people. Either there is academic support, which is good. There is other supports to find jobs, which are also good. But also let's bridge cultural connectivity between communities and also this nation. Because once we give that safe space for people to explore what's out there for them, we should be the one who reach out to build experiences so that people can feel at ease to open their minds to accept the blessing of the nation that we have. I really appreciate you. I hope you found value in my rambling. If you have any question, I will be more than happy to entertain that. But I just realized my time was to 11:50. For some reason, I thought it was still 12. My apologies. Okay, for questions. Okay, Jamie, if there is no question, and I don't know. By the way, I like your pink headset.
Thank you. I try to keep it nice and fun with them. I think the only question that we had was Lester's question about books and any resources that you know of that might give some more insight towards what you were talking about. I don't know if you know of any, but.
So I have dropped my email on the chat for everyone. If you have questions or for book resources, just drop me email and remind me who you are. That way I can respond, or my office manager might not delete your email. Okay, then I can send you books. Okay,
Sounds good. I don't see oh, Matthew Johnson did give another question. I wonder if you have some examples of how your church or your community have connected with others or partnered to serve.
Okay. So I used to go to a church in Valley Creek. It's called Valley Creek in Flower Mound. Predominantly white churches, but the last 6 years we decided to start this church with a group of us with the intention to serve our community. As much as we do Bible studies, Sunday worship, but our focus is how do you equip parents so that they can understand the different cognitive development of children so that they will be here to support their children to be successful in this country. So we use the church as a spiritual hub so that people can get connected with God. But at the same time, we're intentional also in every child ministry. I serve myself on the children's ministry. Our focus is how do you empower parents to know cognitively the development of a child. That way, these kids, when they grow, they look forward to be successful here in the United States.
Well, thank you. So as we all now have your email, thank you very much. And everyone, there is going to be a lunch hour to just drop in, chat, say hello to everybody. Thank you again for coming and joining us. It was a pleasure listening to you speak. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope everybody else has a wonderful rest of their day and the rest of their session.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you.
Of course.